Hey everybody, welcome to DiNiche. It's Peyton Guy and Carla Stiles once again, finally getting right back at it like we never even left.
I know we haven't done a podcast in quite some time. We need to, stay on top of these topics because there's a lot of
I
stuff
know.
happening right now in marketing.
That's right. It feels like we've tried this so many times, but it's just because we have so much to talk about that it's so difficult to keep track of everything that's been going
Yeah,
on. And I
it's
think
just, yeah, I
one
was
of
gonna
the
say it.
biggest topics.
You go first.
No, you're good. I've already been talking too much. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I was gonna say that we today's topic is really about AI and how it's going to affect marketing. So you're
Hmm.
knowledgeable in the aspect of AI and how it's going to affect cybersecurity. I'm going to
Right.
talk about more about the marketing side of things, and we're going to collaborate on what's going on because it's just moving so fast right now.
Sure, absolutely. I think one of the biggest dangers of AI right now is just sort of like the misconceptions of it and
Yeah,
how it came to be, what it actually is, how to use it, and what the future of AI is going to look like in
yeah.
terms of everyday world for most people.
And I mean, think about it. So, I mean, my generation is a little bit different when it comes to that. When we talk about AI and how it affects us, is that we saw a lot of things growing up and how things evolved and all that. And we talked about the Terminator, right? How
That's right.
right, because that was such a frightening movie back then. That when we were
Hmm.
younger, we're like, wow, robots are going to take over the world. Well, here we are today, and now there's a lot of concern about how AI is going to change and
Right.
evolve in businesses. And so, think about that for a minute. And so, I think that we're playing on the aspect of like, what is AI? So, what is AI? For you, Peyton?
Yeah. So really AI is pretty simple in terms of just what it is it's just a library of information that has been fed to a machine that is able to process that information and spit out a desired result. And I think what a lot of people don't understand about AI, and I mean, this is kind of a common misconception, is again, like you mentioned, Terminator, which is the fear that AI is going to take over the world and start to become sentient or whatever. I'm sure there's a lots of different representations of that in media, but I think what's important to realize is that AI is never really going to have a goal beyond its programming. So, a computer doesn't have aspirations. Code doesn't have um, like a particular belief system. It doesn't have anything beyond what it's been told to do, or it doesn't have a heart. It doesn't have a brain. So the only thing that it knows how to do is run through its code and
Yeah,
figure out what needs to be said. And so that can be we can leverage this, right? I mean, it can seem like a person, it can seem like an artist, through these image generation tools and artistry tools and all this kind of stuff. It's very cool, right? But it's never going to be creative on its own because it doesn't have a conscience. It doesn't have life experience. It doesn't have, anything specific to itself that would, generate some sort of nefarious plot to take over the world, or even something, even remotely less than that. The burden is going to be on its programming.
well, I mean, if you think about it, I mean, the closest to being scared, I think, is when I first started programming. We write a lot of series of code, and we told the machine what to do, and it reads that. And so there was a lot of things that we had to do, and so think about that for a second. Is that's changing for us, that model? So going back to that, I think I associate that with like Y2K. So Y2K back then, it was like the system clock was going to change and the computers were going to shut down and the world was going to stop. It was the fear of what Y2K was going to do to the everyday people, how it was going to affect businesses, things like that. And I think that there was a lot of people scared, and we had to rebuild machines. We had to put a lot of networks out, a lot of, so we replaced the standard workstations with these new standalone computers. And a
Right.
lot of people didn't know how to use that technology back then. So when the clock was striking, right, we're all holding our breath, going, okay, the world didn't implode, didn't, completely fall apart. everybody was, because back then it was scary. Nobody knew what was going to happen. You know,
Right.
year 2000 was coming, countdown was happening, and it was like watching the world change, by the clock. And when everything started acting like it was supposed to, people went back to normal lives. It was like, oh my
Right.
gosh. So with AI, I think that there's a lot of excitement, but AI has been around for a long time. People just didn't know that those tools were, a lot of people did not know those tools were accessible.
Right.
So now that we have them, right, what do you do with them? And I think
Yeah.
that we have to be smart about it.
And I want you to DiNiche me on something real quick. What would you say that Y2K was sort of the introduction of extra redundancy or over engineering when it comes to, creating code and stuff like that?
So I mean, we wrote our code from scratch, from
Right.
beginning to end, and
Right.
so there was the if and else statement was the
Hmm.
major aspect of how code was written back then, and it could be very complicated, if you didn't understand it. And so coding was like, if something was entered, this was your output, and this is the way it was displayed. And
Hmm.
so that's how databases were developed. Was we developed that databases by engineering how you wanted the concept to be designed. Because back then we actually programmed and designed databases from scratch. And
Hmm.
so whatever you put in was the output that you were going to get out. Same thing with AI. It's much more sophisticated, and it's written that way to be much more complicated. When you say it's simple, there's much more than simplistic to it. It's a
Yeah.
lot of complicated code. I can't even imagine be the coder for AI. Not even a little. They probably got like all these people are like these. You write this
Hmm.
section of code, this section. You write this section of code. You go write this section, and it all has to communicate
Right. Yeah,
with each
it's
other.
it's very complex. The when I was describing before, it's just the library of information that's being fed. That's the easy part.
Yeah,
Just giving it
it
the
is.
novels, giving it the essays, the conversation threads, the Reddit threads, or
Yeah,
Twitter threads, or anything.
yeah.
All these sorts of conversational topics that it's able to parse through. That's the easy part. What's
It's,
actually the difficult part is writing it. Telling it what to do with this information, because it
yeah.
can't just read it. It has to
What's
know what to do.
the thing is that somebody had a dream. Somebody had a dream about creating something so sophisticated
Hmm.
like this,
Yep.
and they made it happen. It's like
Right.
they were determined to say, I can write this code and I can
Hmm.
make it sophisticated and I can make it work however I want to.
Right.
It's like walking into a library. And back then in a library, we had an index card. You'd go through the index card to find the book that you needed, and then you'd go by the code of where it was at in that library. And you would go down the aisles of that library, and you look for that number and that, that letter or whatever, how it was, organized in that category of, in that library. And you walk through there and you would look for that library book, and it was exactly where you wanted it. And so that's where I think when you talk about library, it's probably so big we can't even imagine what that code looks like. And so
Yeah, I
they're
don't.
probably just sitting there, going through there and looking for that. And it's so fast. The
Right.
processing is done so fast. So I
Yes.
think,
I mean, the processing is done through a very powerful server somewhere, which is the important part. I mean, this is not something that you can just run on your laptop at home or anything like that.
mhm.
This amount of data that they're parsing through is ridiculous. I don't know what the actual number is on it, but it's probably several million um, lines of information. But
It's probably more Google searches. It's probably the more than, because the amount of Google searches is in the millions, right? Billions of
mhm.
searches daily. So you can even imagine how much even something like ChatGPT is being used, and how
Right.
often something is searched. So I can't even imagine how many times that it's formulating and creating content. People are writing code just to, design websites now off of ChatGPT, which,
Right.
I think it takes, I mean, some of the things that's pluses and minuses with ChatGPT or any other AI generated code, it takes out of the human aspect of that, takes its redundancies and the getting things out faster, which are really good. There's some good things out of it, right? That is helpful for us. But as far as marketing goes, I think it's just different for us, um,
Yeah,
in how we utilize it.
right. Yeah, I think with AI, the issue that you run into is just creativity. If you don't tell the AI, or if you don't use the AI properly, you're not going to have a voice. And if we're talking in the context of marketing, obviously you know more about this than I do, but AI is not going to be very great at coming up with a persona for your business, or generating a roadmap of what your marketing strategy is going to be. Um, if you don't have a vision for your company, if you don't have a vision for your marketing strategy, AI is not going to be able to help you, because the only thing that it can do is generate what you've told it to. So, you have to be the supervisor of it. The AI is a little workhorse. It doesn't have information. It can't Google stuff for you. So if you don't know what you're going to be able to do with your marketing strategy, if you don't know what sort of public facing persona or whatever you want to be, it's gonna come out with this formulaic. It's gonna be robotic, and people are frankly gonna be able to read right through it. At the start of ChatGPT, it was very impressive. People could read it and they'd be like, "Wow, this reads like a human." But now we've gotten so good at realizing what ChatGPT looks like, what this text it formulates, what it kind of looks like, and now, I mean, we can read it a mile away.
Well, I mean, the good thing about it is that the technology is staying on target. But marketing aspects is that there's the human aspect is definitely being stripped out of it. And I call it your branding voice, because I think the uniqueness is really important. And I think it's just the choice of not using it and using it, and versus maybe finding the balance between the two. So even if you decide that you get caught up in those AI technology aspects or those softwares that we're talking about, I think that is, where you make those decisions in business. And so, do I think it's going to replace marketing people? I don't think it's going to replace all of them. I think that there's going to be some placeholders of places where people are not going to be as useful as they used to be, because the AI is going to be able to work much, much faster in the analytical aspect and the data aspect. Those generating tools are really useful for that, because people want to move data out faster now. But we also have to think of vulnerabilities and the cyber aspect, where you're very knowledgeable in. So do you see the vulnerabilities in using AI generated programs like that?
Yeah. There's a lot of considerations that need to be had, and this is kind of something that it needs to be considered, which is using AI to generate. If you're talking about strictly from a software development standpoint, if you use AI to generate software for you, that code that you've created, it can't be peer reviewed. I mean, it can't be, you know, if you tell it that, hey, I have this code that I'm using for software and that's proprietary, you're giving that information to somebody else, and you have no idea where it's going. I mean,
Yeah.
OpenAI says they don't store this information, but I mean, come on, we
Yeah.
can't take their word for it.
Well, they do. They
So
store it. And that's the thing
yeah,
that's such a risk, right? And so when you think about the vulnerabilities of that, when you're writing that code, when we think about OpenAI, right, you have to understand it's not secured. Not only that, you have to have a login for ChatGPT, right? You have to have a login for that, even use
yeah, I
the
think so.
tool. Yeah, you
Hmm.
do. So they're logging you every time you use that tool, and they're categorizing it and putting it into a library so that they can start monitoring what you're creating, and so they can humanize it to offer more and more suggestive ideas for you when you're generating content for you or whatever they're trying to do, right?
I
Um,
think, yeah, I mean, I think ChatGPT only they feed a very specific library, so it only goes up to 2020, I think. But who knows what they're? I mean, they, like I said, they claim to not store that information, but I mean, they're processing it in real time, which is like, I mean, you might as well be storing it at that point. If your information is not secure in transit and while it's being processed, there's no point in saying that it isn't stored. So, if you're using AI properly, which is to, um, help you learn, or to help you with something that is not at risk of being in violation of an NDA or any sort of
Right.
a security risk. Obviously you're not going to be giving an AI your password, or you're not going to tell it to generate a password for you. As long as you're doing something like that, you can use it, obviously, but you have to be very careful about the information that you feed it, because as soon as you let it out there, I mean,
Yeah.
it's gone. You don't know where it's gone.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, if you think about in your field that you're in with cybersecurity, um, is that something that we should start paying attention to more? I mean, in some ways or another, we're opening ourselves up to so much vulnerability we don't even realize we're
mhm,
doing it. Is that something
right.
that we really need to think about before we start using these tools?
Absolutely. So what I've been actually doing is I've been doing some independent research on ChatGPT and its ability to break into certain systems, whether it be an account or whether it be an operating system or a website or anything like this. It's very good at analyzing what code is publicly available. So if you have a website that isn't protected from, let's say you have a SQL server, and if you want to do some SQL injection or whatever, ChatGPT is excellent at recognizing the vulnerabilities that are pretty common within SQL, and it can attack those vulnerabilities that you have on your website. Another really great thing is actually password cracking, which is really funny. I've been able to create this persona of a person who, I don't know, they like baseball or something like that. And so what I can do is I can give it almost a profile of this person, right?
Right.
And then I could say, create a password for this individual, and then it would create a more likely password than, I don't know, somebody who doesn't even know who that is. So, it's able to sort of use these strategies in order to help with security, but or I guess break into accounts, which is, it's all part of the whole umbrella of security research. I think there are ways that we can use ChatGPT commercially, help, like, in a way, for like a way to deploy it within a company. Um, and there's a lot of concerns with that too. But I think the issue that you would run into mostly is having it connected to the internet. If you're going to use AI, it has to be for a company. The only way to deploy it would be if you have it stored on a box in a server somewhere with no Ethernet port, literally just running like straight on its own. That's the only thing that I can possibly think of on its own system.
I mean, if you think about some of the creative tools, in some ways or another, I mean, I don't necessarily want to use AI generated tools, but I do use
Yeah,
some features
sure.
because in marketing, we always have to be creative. We always have to come up with new ideas. And I think that sometimes we get kind of stuck, and I think, or something comes out wrong because I'm not the best content person. I have an idea of how I want it to look like, or I have an idea of how I want it to say. Putting those formulas together makes me look
Yeah,
good and using those AI tools. So I think that in some ways or another, they're good for adding that extra, you know what I mean?
yeah.
Like the extra, sprinkles on top or whatever.
Absolutely. I mean, swearing off AI entirely is, in my opinion, it's foolish. I mean, you have to. This is the new world that we're being introduced
Yeah.
to, right?
Yeah.
I mean, if you don't know how to use AI, if you don't know how to use it properly, then you're going to be left behind. I mean, that's just the reality of the situation.
Yeah.
So if you have, let's say you have a resume, right, and this is like maybe your first resume that you're putting together, and you're like, okay, well, I mean, I don't know how to phrase this, so you
Yeah.
you told, like, what did I do here at this job, and
Yeah.
you tell it what you did, and then it's able to come up with a great, like, little blurb for your resume that explains exactly, the concepts and the skills that you gained at this job.
Yeah.
um, and if you're not using AI for something like that, I mean, you're going to be left behind, because there are really, really great ways of using it. The
Yeah.
important thing is you have to feed it the information, right? You have to kind of baby it a little bit. It doesn't verify information on its own. It's
Yeah.
going to make stuff up. So if you ask it, anything that might be factual or anything like this, it's gonna make stuff up. I mean, I was gonna use a different phrase there, but it doesn't know
Yeah.
anything. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So you have to be very specific with what you tell it and what
Yeah.
you ask it, because then it's able to parse through that information, and then you read it, you peer review it, right? I mean,
Yeah.
this is the most important thing. I mean, we know about scientific research, right? If it's got to be peer reviewed. So as you're compiling your document, you say, okay, this makes sense.
Yeah.
This is correct. Yes, yes, yes. All right, cool. Awesome. Send it out, right? You can't say, use it in class and you're like, oh, write this essay on a book that it like has read, but it like doesn't like it can't parse through, it can't formulate its own ideas on How to Kill a Mockingbird. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Or To Kill a Mockingbird, not How to Kill a Mockingbird. But
We know
To
what you
Kill a
meant.
Mockingbird.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
I think that in some ways or another, think about it. I mean, there's some really cool, sophisticated things that we're doing now that
Right.
we're not having to work so hard at. And how do we go about, using them? I think it all depends on the company. But there also has to be guidelines, of like how much of it are we supposed to be using. And I think
Right.
that has to be really set up front. If you're a marketing company, like how many of these AI tools are we using,
Mm-hmm.
and which ones are we saying yes to? Because you can have too many pieces of AI programs that it takes away from the aspect of who you are as a company. And I think
Yeah.
that you need to follow your guidelines as far as your mission and vision and value statements for your company to integrate these AI programs inward, right? So
That is a great question, and I think that actually I might actually have an answer for you. And you
okay,
want me to tell you what this
yeah,
is?
yeah.
I think that as soon as you start using AI to tell you what to think, you are using it incorrectly.
Oh, totally.
That's,
Yeah, I like that
I mean,
statement.
yeah. So if you're a marketing company, or if you're writing an email, or if you're doing this or you're doing this, right? You can 100% use AI for it, right? But you have to have the goal. You have to have the information. You have to have all this laid out. You have to do 90% of the work. Because it's going to make, like I said before, it's going to make stuff up on its own. But if you tell it, if you say, okay, I have this particular goal in mind, I want to write an email that has this tone, written to this person with this information filled in there, it'll do it great, right? It'll fill out all this information. It'll be perfect. It saves you maybe 15 minutes of writing an email, right? But if you say, oh, what do I think about this, or how exactly does this affect this, or whatever, if you don't do the research on your own, you're letting it guide your life, and in fact, it's going to be wrong.
Yeah. I mean, I'm my life has been, I'm not perfect. And I think in some ways or another, right? I mean, think about it. I mean, you learn from mistakes. Your businesses will have to, it's like a roller coaster where either
Right.
up or you're down, or you ride in the course and you're just having a good time. Or you go, I accept the bumps in the roads of, okay, I make mistakes. I think that in some ways or another, we have to own up to those mistakes. And I think in some ways or another, AI kind of takes place. And if you say I use it too much, then it takes away from the person. And I think in some ways or another, I rather own up to my mistakes. I rather say, oh, I made a mistake. Or I didn't, write this correctly or whatever. But I do think in some ways or another, we have to go, all right, how many of the AI programs I'm going to use? What is good for us? What is good value? What's not good value? I don't necessarily immerse myself into too many programs like that.
Right.
I think I'm old school in some ways or another, and I like to be creative. And I like to be, designing with an idea in mind. And so that it seems original. I like to be original. And so I like the idea of conceptual ideas brought forth, but then I'm going to take it and I'm going to rip it all apart anyways.
Yeah.
So it's
Yeah.
always a good tool to see, but I think it's like I like to strip it apart and make it my own. So I'm always going to have my
Absolutely.
originality in it. I want my
Hmm.
voice in it. I want it to
For
be
sure.
branded the way we want to. Do you understand that?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I'm very particular about the content that I write, the graphics that I design. Anything that I do has this level of of my personality in it, that if it's not contained within that, in my opinion,
Yeah.
it's not adequate enough. Like I just can't in good conscience push this out if it's not to the quality that I require it to be,
Yeah.
because everything that I put out is a reflection of myself. So
Yeah. If you think about it, I mean, Google is meant for users, right? It's not meant for businesses. So when Google is creating its search components for us, we're trying to beat Google's algorithm as marketing people. But in some ways or concept, we're users in the end. That's how Google sees us, as users, not as business
right,
owners. And so in some ways or another, Google is going to set the standards. They own 92% of the search aspect anyways. So when you've got Microsoft investing money into ChatGPT, and then you've got Google over here creating its own AI, right? What did we look at? It was called
it's
Palm
Palm 2,
2
yeah.
coming out.
Hmm.
And
Yeah, it's that
so,
same. Yeah, it's on the same generation as GPT-3, I think.
right. Yeah. And so we've got this battle going on. However, in some ways or another, these tools, even though we're using them, Google still is going to penalize for AI generated content. So,
Hmm.
some ways or another, you have to find a balance of not utilizing as ideas, but also creating originality, because
Right.
in the end, your website or your business is going to get punished for using those AI generated programs, anyways.
Yeah, I think that something that needs to be considered, especially when you're talking about building websites with AI, is that what sorts of things do I look for whenever I'm on a website that make me want to stay on that website or do business with this company? And it's the personality of when I'm actually reading through it. It's like, okay, are they using these action words that I really, really like I connect with? Or, do they have a personality? Is this the kind of business that I want to do business with? So, whenever you're using AI, if you're using it at all, you have to be very specific about what you give it. And I think Google punishing websites that have AI generated content as the main, ingredient for the actual generation of their content, it makes a lot of sense, because in the future, um, all of these AI language learning models are going to be based on these websites. So if you have AI that's trained on content that was generated by AI, it becomes totally redundant. It's ridiculous. So
Well,
yeah,
you're going to see, I mean, everything's so new right now to a lot of people, even though you and I have probably seen it, or I've seen it a lot longer than probably you have, really. And if you think about how long ago, right? We went from,
you
a
do this to
society.
yourself, Carla.
I do. I just want to know, because I want to be smarter than you. Just make sure that
You don't have to. You don't have
I
to
just want
fight
to
for
make
that.
sure
You already
you.
are.
Oh yeah, I'm actually, no, I'm just not. I just make it sound good. Um, but when we talk about longevity of how this company, how you go from one company to the next company over the years, right? So when we talk about longevity and how technologies change in less than 20 years, could you imagine what it's going to be like in the next 20 years?
Absolutely.
So in some ways or another, AI is useful. It's a useful tool for things that we need. Don't you
Right.
think it's something that we should use when we're creating, components like the meat of it, And so I
Mhm.
think the reference is there, but I think it's a concern when we're replacing it, thinking it's going to replace the
Yeah.
human aspect of our business. And I think that's
Absolutely.
the biggest topic that people need to talk about.
I think that we are kind of in a unique position right now with I don't know if you're familiar with this phenomenon, but there was this assumption when technology was sort of starting to develop even more. I think this is around the late, 2010s, when I was starting to get into it, learning more about it. Um, the younger children around that time, the kids that are kind of just now growing up, we kind of made this assumption that they would be better at technology than we are. But because of the abstraction that they have experienced with things just kind of working, That's the Apple way, which is, you plug in the computer and it works, or you plug in the printer and it just prints, which is very, that's kind of, that's sort of new-ish in the world of technology. We had to grow up and we had to learn how to use these things. We had to learn how to code. We had to learn how to make websites with HTML, then eventually JavaScript, and then CSS and
Yeah.
PHP and all this, right?
Right.
Now, um, these kids, they don't have that hurdle, right, to do that. So now they know even less about technology than we do, which is kind of unique. And so what we kind of are, like I said, we're in that unique advantage where now we can learn from these AI models, and we can learn to use them to our advantage.
Right.
Um,
But
and
but
because
when you hit on something though, let's talk about that for a second. When you said,
right,
um, because when we talk about like how the how technology has changed over the years, well, the one thing that I think that we have to think about is our younger generation, how they're going to be useful in the technology aspect in the next 20 years. And
right,
so how are they going to level up to, to the commode to where we're at today? So I've seen it where it began as far as like coding websites and how the online industry has changed over the years, right? And all the coding is
right,
done. I mean, think about that. Think there wasn't cyber networking or cybersecurity during that time. And now we're like, it's, I think in the last, 10 years, we're seeing it just like explode. And where
absolutely,
we need more people in that industry more than, and so I think that that's a big thing, right? And so
absolutely.
now we've got a technology of students coming up out in the world that this is all they've known. So what are they going to do to level that up? So is
Mhm.
AI going to be a crutch? Is it going to hold them back to be more sophisticated? I'm not
Yeah.
saying, but in some ways, are we going to take ideas of AI and replace the ideas of creativity? Which I'm hoping they don't, but
Mhm.
you never know, right?
Yeah, I don't think AI is going to replace like a lot of creative things. I mean, I think that it's a tool, right? And so it'll be interesting to see how the world progresses beyond that, since it has begun. But
I
I
think it's
think
going to
that
be very
only
dangerous.
it
I,
can be. I mean,
I think it's going to be very
really only
dangerous.
time will tell. Yeah.
No, I think that there's going to be some things that we're going to see in our world that we've not seen before in AI. And I think that we're going to have to dispute, is it real or not?
Yeah.
I mean, the aspect of that is like that's the biggest concern that I have is like, is it real? Because now we've got the technology of of voice, and now we can replace faces with filters, and so
Hmm.
when is there going to be an aspect where we're going to have to really understand, is this the person that's supposed to be in the video talking to me? We've got ways to replace people in an actual video with
Right.
computerized generated people that are, what I mean, all you got to type in their the script, and they do it for you. So that's something that those components that we're looking at still takes away from the human aspect of us, that business. And so there has to be a no, I'm not going to do that.
Hmm.
But there's going to be people who are going to be tempted to do it because this new.
Yeah, I mean, you're entering into a world of regulatory bodies, and sort of like how exactly are we going to approach this from the future on. And it's interesting because the kind of the cat's out of the bag now, right? I mean, we can't undo the development of technology. I mean, that's just kind of how the world has worked. And so we have um, this really interesting situation where we're almost, and this is going to be weird, but stick with me, right? Where we're almost back in like the days before cameras, before recording devices, before anything like that, because now all that stuff can be forged, right? I mean, you can't trust anything. So now it's crazy because we used to be like, oh well, this world of technology where everything's being recorded and everything is being,
Yeah.
whatever. it's all now totally cannot be held up to scrutiny because AI is going to. It's not quite there yet, but I mean it will, right? I
Yeah.
mean it's not everything is going to be questionable.
Well,
So,
I
we
and
don't know whether we see it with our own eyes whether it's true or not.
yeah. So I think we're going to wrap it up. I want to talk about what I think foreseeing what's going to happen. Here's my predictions. I think AI is going to
Oh, we
continue.
going into predictions?
Yeah, I am gonna. I'm gonna give you my prediction.
This is on the
I
record, guys.
Okay. Just want to make sure you write this down.
That's
I
right.
I think that with technology and it's moving so fast, you're going to have the people that are going to jump on board and go all the way with it, right?
Hmm.
Or you're going to have those people, and I think that the percentage of those people are starting to get tired and worn out with technology. And so I think it is either way of either they're going to go backwards and just turn everything off, where they're going to come off of everything, or you're going to have those few percentages, or they're going to go all the way with it. They're going to be
Right.
amidst in it. So I don't think it's going to be in between. I think it's either completely coming off of technology, giving it a rest, because I think we're just so overstimulated with so many technology. Marketing is moving so fast now. I mean,
Hmm.
there's so much stuff that's coming out so rapidly now. It is so hard to keep up with it now. Like, it is like, where do you go next?
Right.
Because you've got this battle now between Google, and Google's now taking mobile sites versus websites and the data. Now people are complaining about a lot of things that are happening with Google now, and the stripping of data, G4 tracking versus, all. So what I'm saying is that the components of marketing is starting to change. And
Right.
so now they're throwing AI at us, and they're trying to scare people into thinking, oh my gosh, you're going to be replaced. Well, the problem with AI is that there's things that are going to be replaced only if the businesses let them, right? It is up to the
Yeah.
business to make that decision.
Absolutely. Yeah, totally. I mean, the introduction of AI into the business is going to be interesting. And then I think, all right, if we're going into predictions, here's my prediction, right? And I think I touched on it a little bit earlier. I think that businesses will open AI, will be open to AI with open arms, right? Um, if they're able to utilize it effectively in their particular field with no connection to the internet. And here's how I see it working. And actually, I think that this could be like a great solution to the issue that we have with privacy. Um, if you have a AI model, and let's say you have, okay, we'll say you're uh, a law firm, right? What if you had all of your cases and all of the case files that you lean on in order to make arguments in the courtroom, right? I'm not a lawyer, so I don't really know how it works currently. But if you have this database and you make it completely searchable, right? And you say, give me all of the laws and all of the
I wrote that.
cases.
I wrote that program, right?
You wrote that program.
Yes. Yeah. I wrote a database for a client of mine years ago, and it was an in-house database that we put online
Hmm.
for their website. And we matched the case. Here's the sample case to the expert. And so you could go and look for that case study based on your keywords that you put in, and it will give you the experts that were qualified for that case. And so those things exist. Those things can be
Hmm.
also internal. So you can actually have this internal database
Right.
that's stripped from the internet completely. It'll have its own
Yeah.
private IP or dedicated IP, and no one is able outside of, unless somebody cracks it, of course, a hacker or a spammer, and of course they're always there. But those databases exist.
Yeah.
So when you talk about that, that's already there if people would use it.
Right, but I'm talking about from like an AI perspective. If you
Yeah.
like the difficulty that you run into with that is that it has to contain those keywords, right? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
obviously it's a very sophisticated piece of technology. Databases are very, very important and they're very
Mm-hmm.
complicated. But if you're able to give an AI an entire database and give it access to all of this information, and then you're like, all right, well, I'm formulating a case on this, and then it'll spit out all of this relevant information from specific case files. And like I said before, you can have it completely localized. It
Yeah, but
doesn't
why to
need
go to
anything other than the
but
information you gave it.
hold on, if you even did that, why even go to court? It would already have the prejudgment for you.
No. I'm talking about as a lawyer. Like if I'm a defense attorney.
But if you want to go one step up, you could already have it predetermined if it's going to go to court or not. Do you understand? Like you could take it up to the
Carla,
next degree.
Carla, do you want to charge people before they've had due process?
No,
Is
no,
that what
no.
you're saying right now?
No. It's not what I'm saying. Not what I'm saying. What I mean is that the sophistication of AI can be a level that we've not even thought about or even conceived yet. It can make
Mm-hmm.
it is a decision making that takes the human aspect out of it. That's what AI does.
Right.
And so it can do, if you write the code, you can write the code to tell it to make decisions because it has no emotion attached
Mm-hmm.
to it. That's why people use it. And because there's,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah. I mean, I guess like in like a dystopian future, you could have AI that's making charges on people. But I hopefully I think that we're not quite there.
no, but what I'm saying to you
And I
is
hope I'm
that
dead whenever that happens.
you make, there's levels of sophistication that we've not tapped into you, which can be dangerous. And I think that's what people are concerned about is that the
Yeah.
level of AI and how it's going to take decision making and make it simpler because it takes complicated tasks and makes a decision for us. And so whatever you decide, whatever you could put an HR database together and do that kind of stuff. Is this person productive? Did they put enough hours? Are they, is their production hours versus their non-productive hours equal out? And it can
Right.
make a decision like, is this person, is that person in the highest percentage to keep them on a board? So
Yeah.
you can create scenarios
Mm-hmm.
with those AIs if you wanted to.
Yeah, I think the issue that you run into with the HR one is that it's that same deal where it's garbage in, garbage out, because
Yeah.
that information that you're collecting is the issue, right? It's like, why are you collecting like specific information? In order for it to make that decision, it would have to have very invasive data points,
Well,
right?
that's why I think in marketing, it's really a useful tool in the AI aspect with more of the data analytics. Because let's
Right.
say that you want a strategy for your business and you're not really sure how to read data analytics because a lot of people don't know how to read it. You give them a
Right.
bunch of numbers and graphs and, impressions and clicks, and they don't understand all that. But with an AI actual tool, with that AI tool can actually simplify that process and make better decisions for your business aspect. So that's a useful tool. It makes the
Yeah.
human aspect learn how to read that data analytics a lot faster. And I think that's a useful aspect of it. But when you're crossing the line and making decisions within your business, that's when we're considering AI to be a kind of a dangerous aspect or dangerous
Yeah.
technology that we're
Right.
involved
Absolutely.
in. Yeah.
Yeah.
So well, I think that is there anything else in AI that you think that people really need to know about today?
I mean, I think that we pretty much touched on it. And I think really the thing that we're going to look for now is just where it goes from here.
Yeah,
There's a lot of interesting stuff that's out there, and then how governments are going to respond to it, how people respond to it, and how the companies respond to it is going
yeah,
to be kind of the determining factor on where AI goes in the future.
yeah.
Um, I think I think rightfully so, we're very skeptical of AI, and that's a good thing because there's a lot that's going on that we don't really know a lot about, and that's even professionals, right? Even the people who make it, there's a level of misunderstanding, um, and it's
Well,
just
I think it's
there's so
confusing.
much.
Yeah, it's confusing. And people, there's some people who just they don't even know how to turn on their cell phones.
Yeah,
Think about that. They don't even know how to send out an email properly. I mean, the aspect of AI can be very complicated and very
right.
confusing. And so if they don't have the technology aspect, they don't understand it. And so I think that could be misleading to people thinking they can use it, but they don't. They see it, spitting out information, but they don't understand what the end result's going to be. and how it's going to affect
Absolutely.
their business. And I think that's such an important aspect to talk about. What is the
Absolutely.
vulnerabilities? Is it a risk factor? Is it so what is the pros and cons? And I think that people need to sit down and write that out. What are the pros and cons of utilizing AI and AI tools and within my business?
Yep. Absolutely.
All right. So we're going to do another DiNiche pretty soon.
Yeah, absolutely. DiNiche, we'll have to. I think I've got a good topic that we've got for our next one, so I'm really looking forward to that one. And this
Okay.
one you're not going to know enough about, so that way I
You're
can
trying to
actually run
stump
the
me.
show on it.
I think that's what you're trying to do. I think you're trying to stump me so that you want to be smarter than me. So
Carla, would you like to live in a world where you aren't challenged?
no, I like to be challenged. And listen, even though you try to come at with me with technology or terms, I'm like, oh yeah, well I got one on you.
Hmm.
Yeah, but it's fun. I enjoy it. Thank you for today. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you for joining me, and I'm glad we were able to do this again. And I guess we'll see you in the next one for sure.
Thanks.